is officially substituting for Brian Gregory this morning. We have a quorum for our Environment Committee meeting, so let's get rolling. First thing, I do have a number of apologies. You can see the missing seats at the table here. Debbie Hewitt, Rick Barker, Rex Graham, Brian Gregory, Peter Paku, Rex, Brian, Peter are crook. Rick is out of the country. Debbie, I'm not sure about. And Alan is potentially on jury duty, and if he's not here, probably is on jury duty this morning. So what you see is what you get as far as the Environment Committee attendance for the day.
So do we actually have any formal apologies that we need to?
So we do need to accept those apologies. Someone would move that?
I'll move in that direction, Chair.
Just second. Okay,
just,
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just
yes.
In terms of Brian Gregory, he's got a hospital appointment this afternoon regarding his recent stay in hospital, so it's quite serious for him.
Okay. Did we accept those officially? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Well, Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
so the quorum is I'm taking it as 6. It's just that I had a meeting at 10.
The quorum 6 or 5? 5. It's 5. I thought.
Yeah.
So we need to get all.
Oh, it's 5 for council, but
But this is not a council meeting, it's 6.
6 for committee.
So I'll make other arrangements, Mr. Chair.
6 for committee?
We would be deeply indebted. You would extend that courtesy, Councillor Kirk.
Mr. Chair, I have to leave at 12. I've got a plane to catch to Wellington.
All right. Thank you. Any other escapees?
Yes, Chair, I have to be away at 4:30, so.
Okay.
Sorry, putting this point of order, Chair. Can Mike count as part of a quorum?
For committee, yes.
He can.
Yes, I can go get standing orders, but
Okay.
Leanne and our Chief Executive concur on this point, Councillor?
Right, I'm very happy to accept their judgment. Otherwise, we can't do anything.
All right. Well, we're going to have a
leave.
friendly chat. Are there any other notices people care to give? Okay. Any conflict of interest declarations? Fine. So let's move to confirmation of the minutes, which I will take as read. And are there any factual corrections to be made to these minutes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right.
I'm happy to move, Chair.
Councillor Bevan has moved. Somebody would second that, please. Councillor Bailey, thank you. All those in favor of approving the minutes? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Any matters arising from those?
Yeah, Chair, I'm just looking at item 11 on those minutes, the Manga Poiki landslide. Can somebody give us an update on whether that's now stable and what's happened?
My news is probably old news, but I'm not aware that it's not stable. It's been behaving reasonably well since we first heard of it. You heard anything differently? No.
I wonder if we could just maybe get an update to the next, probably not to the next environmental services, because that'll be like 2 months or 3 months, maybe to the next council meeting.
Okay. Noted. Any other comments, questions on the minutes? All right. We'll move to follow-up items. Which, page 3. Anyone have any, or any of these need to be discussed?
We'll take questions.
Just take questions on any of these. Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chief Executive, the due diligence and commercial forestry opportunity with Nikki, where's that at?
We have a draft memorandum of understanding between Ngāti Kahungunu and ourselves, which is currently being translated into reo at Ngāti Kahungunu end, and we are awaiting a proposal from a consortium led by P.F. Olsen on providing commercial advice to both Ngāti Kahungunu and ourselves on the forestry investment opportunities. That was due on Monday, just gone. They asked for a bit more time, and we're now expecting it tomorrow. And we'll be bringing that to Council at the next available opportunity.
Okay. So I just, to complete that, are we talking numbers here? And are we talking land availability here?
So what the study will look at is the whole region. It will look at a mixture of different soils, topography, climates, proximity to infrastructure, etc., current land use, and then it will look at a whole range of different forest types, from natives right through to short rotation plantation and everything in between, and it will provide an economic analysis of different land use for those different forest types, and that will guide our thinking about what's commercial and economic, what's sub-commercial, and what sits in the purely public good space. And it will help direct our activity on the ground towards areas where there are greater commercial opportunities or otherwise.
Thank you.
Mr. Bailey?
Just to follow up from that, Chair, in the consultation document we did for the long-term plan, it was quite clear that we were going to go out for public consultation around any reforestation program that we would look at, apart from the riparian planting, the $30 million. Is that expected to be all part of the public consultation, or when do you expect that to start happening?
So the reason we're doing this work is so that we can have a informed public consultation with some substantive analysis. And so recognising that we need to produce a consultation document under the Local Government Act that will need to be audited by the Office of the Auditor General. We need a robust investment case for going into this activity. So the work we're doing now is to prepare ourselves for that public consultation.
Right. And a further question from that, Chair. Have you considered seeking the advice of anyone apart from P.F. Olsen? Or?
So what we've asked Olsen's to do in the first instance is to reach out to various parties in the likes of Scion, where there is national expertise across a range of different species, and form a consortium, and that's the proposal we're expecting to see tomorrow. What we've said to them is that we are likely to get some of that peer reviewed by other parties, and we may also commission research from other parties in areas where they don't have any expertise or can't provide us with advice. So we've asked them to indicate what they can do and what they can't do, and the next step will be to fill the gaps.
So at some, sorry, Chair. So at some stage, I would expect you to be talking to, for example, the Hawke's Bay Farm Forestry Association?
Yes. So the Hawke's Bay Farm Forestry Association is represented on the advisory group that Ian's pulling together to look at our activity across the board.
Cool. Yep. Thank you.
Councillor?
Just in the same area, so given the government's ambitious plan to plant, is it 1 billion trees or more? There must be things happening at a national level as well in terms of those types of investigations. Is there anything happening there that you're aware of that we might be able to tap into?
Yes, so we've been, both Ian and I have been engaging with Crown officials regularly over the last couple of months on this question. They've done a very high-level national analysis, and the current conversation that we are having with them, along with the other regional councils of New Zealand, is the regional councils taking the analysis to a more higher resolution at regional scale, and effectively regional councils being the delivery agent on behalf of central government for the Billion Trees program. So that's the work that's going on right now. Ian commissioned on behalf of all the regional councils a stock take of where regional councils are at today in terms of capability for implementing the Billion Trees program. That's fed into a a cabinet paper which has either gone up or going up.
Gone up.
It's just gone up. Hasn't been released, and now there's a body of work which we're doing with the other regional councils around the pipeline of activity that needs to be constructed from nursery stock right through to workforces, through to future value chains for alternative species, etc. All of that is being worked up for a further cabinet report back in October on implementation. So we're working very closely with the Crown officials on the whole Billion Trees program, and really I think look, it's fair to say that the government was keen to get some runs on the board by doing some early planting this winter for some demonstration effect, and that's been done around the country. But ministers and Crown officials have quickly come to the conclusion that to genuinely fulfil the Billion Trees ambition, there needs to be a systemic, planned national exercise around how you actually eat this elephant and how do you organise everybody's resources in a way that is most effective. So that's the work we're doing at the moment.
It's a good idea that needs a lot of work.
Exactly. And look, the government's own new agency, Te Uru Rako, is just being stood up now, head office in Rotorua, and they're busy trying to recruit and build an organisation as well. So it's all moving forward, but there's lots of work that lies ahead.
Okay, I will move from the chair that we accept the follow-ups. Someone second that?
Second.
Mr. Curtin? All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Those carried. So, any items of business not on the agenda, folks would care to add? Terrific. None of those. All right. So let's go to our first item of business, which is Catchment Grants Policy. I notice we have some guests in the audience who are particularly interested in how we're approaching this subject and trees in general. So a lot of anticipation about this presentation.
Sure.
Go for it.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just invite Amanda Langley up the front. And Amanda, Liz, can you just find Amanda's presentation and get it started? Amanda's been working with the team on the development of this policy, which has been a bit of work that's been on the go for some months now, and is really the final stage in us being able to start using the resource that's available in anger and begin some works. And the papers, the policy's attached, and it's reasonably very comprehensive. I guess there's a couple of general comments I'll make, and then we'll hand over to Amanda to go through the presentation and then just take questions. One is that I really want to stress that what we've attempted to do is create a policy that's designed to drive uptake. So we want a policy that will, within reason, allow us to have a reasonably wide open pipe to get things in the door, considered and out again, funded and out again, and in place. Because one of the big challenges that we've got, and we just had a brief conversation around that, is overcoming the inertia, not only within Hawke's Bay but across the country generally, around getting the stuff operating at pace and scale. There is a lot of work for the teams to do across catchments to generate interest in the areas that traditionally haven't had them, to socialise the availability of this, to work with the landowner communities to have them understand how they can connect into it. So what we've tried to do is design a policy that doesn't create any barriers to that makes it relatively easy for them to get in and get out and be funded for things that we think will make a difference to the things that you've signalled both in the strategic plan and the long-term plan. So that's the kind of underlying philosophy that sits within the policy. As we go further into this journey and we learn more, we will adapt it, and we'll come back to you regularly and we'll tell you how we're going and where we think things need to change and why. And we'll ask you to refine the policy. What we're looking to do is, as demand for the resource reaches or outgrows availability, then obviously we'll be looking to further refine, narrow up and prioritise where we would go to the high value areas, the areas that will make a difference or more of a difference. But initially, like I say, we want to get as much in as we can to overcome inertia and get this thing up and running. There is a separate bit of work that we're doing on engagement and communication. We understand that for many landowners, this will be complete news to them. That there's issues that we would see on their land, and then B, that we're able to help them. So there's a substantive piece of work that we're doing around engagement and communication with landowners that will be allied to this and help us with that job. And then, look, just the final point, just an error on my part. In paragraph 4 of the cover paper, I didn't update that to reflect the text that's in the attached appendice, which is on page 7 of your documents not included in the agenda, in the 4th paragraph down, that just sort of sets out a little bit more context around the difference between the proposition that the grant scheme sits within that commercial environment, but in that they are being developed separately, and we've had that conversation. But this being a piece of work that is funded and is ready to go, and we want to get going as quick as we can. So look, enough from me. I'll hand over to Amanda. She'll run you through a presentation, then I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ian. So today, essentially, I'll just give you an overview of parts of the policy and its key components. I'm not going to go into any detail, but I'm happy to take any questions around the detail. And provide you just a very broad overview of the other components of work to actually stand the scheme up. Just reiterating that obviously through the long-term plan, 130 million was approved for the Hawke's Bay afforestation program.
Sorry, I wasn't aware that $130 million, but sorry, Chair, I wasn't aware $130 million was approved in the long-term plan.
Yeah, sorry, that's a typo. It's $30 million is approved for the afforestation, the non-commercial. There was $100 million signalled for investment into the commercial space. Yeah. And there's $5 million that sits in the farm environment plan. Yeah. So it's $30 million into the erosion grant scheme that we're describing today.
Sorry, my mistake. Yep. So just to, again, reiterate, HBRIC is leading the commercial element. That piece of work, they're mutually beneficial, but they are being looked at separately at this point, and HBRC is obviously establishing this grant scheme. This is what we'll be focusing on today, and this is what the policy is relevant to. Want to add anything there, Ian?
So it's explained in the policy, and you'll see the diagram that's pulled out of the policy that reflects all of that.
Okay, in terms of the, Ian's obviously touched on this, but just talking around the actual strategy that shaped the policy. Obviously, there's a number of key drivers at the moment. Regional, central government strategic priorities. There's many of those of which this piece of work aligns to: climate change, building of the regional resilience, the billion trees, etc. In addition, public concerns. The environment issues are at the forefront, and we've seen that in the Hawke's Bay and nationally. And I think probably the difference that we're seeing really now is a sense of urgency and a need for scale and pace. So this investment, obviously, and commitment enables that scale and pace and the opportunity to leverage at a central government level as well. There's a number of known barriers of which, again, this policy tries to look at and help to address. There's a range of landholder reservations around this, cultural identity associated with farming. There's bias towards that versus, moving into necessarily large afforestation. There's a reluctance around management of planted areas at times. It creates additional management barriers. And to a certain extent, there's also some normalising of erosion land. So those are not necessarily things that the money addresses straight up. There's a long lead time into the grant, and we just want to acknowledge that piece as well. Supply and resource constraints, we know that that exists already, and that's also recognised at a national level, and something that we will also work with central government to align with whatever strategy they're taking there. The communications reach, again, there's a limit of council's reach, there's a limit to industry's reach. So using our extension networks and reinforcing the need to work across those networks and industry bodies to get the messages out and to link and engage with landowners who we want to move to different ways of treating this land. So, yeah, in terms of this early phase with the policy, the driver is the early uptake. We want to break the inertia. A 75-25 split is, we recognise is generous, and at this point we're just really driving that maximum acceleration where we can. The ICM teams will target areas of greatest priority. We are looking at the high-risk erosion land, and we are thinking there the eligibility of 1,000 tonnes of sediment loss per hectare per annum. There are areas, however, where it ultimately will come down to the ICM team's eyes and experience on the ground. So SEDNet, which is a modelling tool, the risk modelling tool, is a primary source, but nothing takes away from the team on the ground and their experience. The erosion control plans, they will be developed in conjunction with the landholder. So it's allowing for a much more targeted approach to the property and allows also for consideration of that landholder's operations and their priorities. We, with the applications, when they do exceed a financial limit, then the prioritisations of applications will occur. So at this point, we are trying to just drive the uptake. At some point, we expect that the scheme will be oversubscribed, and we'll be re-looking at tightening that up and focusing to far more targeted areas. The erosion control plans will provide a start point, and they will be integrated into the future FEMPs when and at which point they become required. So in some areas they're not required. The mix of incentives, we've looked at a wide range of mix, and that's been to compel that uptake. Also really considering on the ground what are the most effective means to controlling and treating soil loss. As Ian pointed out, review is going to be a really strong aspect for this. We've considered annual review for the policy, and that will need to be something that's regularly looked into, because ultimately it needs to stay current and relevant to the situation. That's going to be driven into the processes. The actual the erosion control mechanisms, they're detailed in the policy itself, so I'm not going to go through those in great detail, but broadly speaking, we've looked at direct support grants. That's a 75-25 split. The 25% from the landholder in the default position is that's lump sum payment. Depending on the size of the project, that may be looked at on a discretionary basis as a voluntary targeted rate. The land purchase, that is in there as an exception. Obviously, the 30 million will not go very far if we're looking at large-scale land purchase, so that is very much an exception basis. The other grant mechanisms, we've got an allowance there for strategic relationship grant and an innovation grant. That's that's there to accelerate the reach and the momentum only. So that's very much, again, a discretionary grant, but that is 100%. The strategic relationship grant, however, we see that needs to be at least contributed to, if not matched.
So can you describe a strategic relationship?
Yeah, sure. So, for example, we might look to co-fund a resource from Beef and Lamb, their future policy and strategy for working out there. If that's aligned, then there could be some advantage for us to actually get another body out there without HBRC necessarily across their chest.
It's just recognising, Councillor, that our brand might not be the best fit in some environments, and if there is another brand that carries the same message and will do the job, we'll partner with them to achieve it. Beef and Lamb's latest strategy is a good example of a strategy that aligns with us, so there may be opportunities for us to partner with them.
The financial assistance around stockwater reticulation. So in some cases where areas have been, stock has been denied access as a result of the erosion control measures, then we're looking at supporting stockwater reticulation. That would not be a full subsidy, that would be looking more like a Heat Smart loan, so a subsidised interest rate for the loan and used as a voluntary targeted rate. That will not be available for this financial year. It was not signalled for this financial year, so we will look into that and as part of the annual review of the policy, consider putting that forward for next financial year. In terms of the project, obviously the policy is one component, it is setting down the rules and how funding can be allocated. However, there's many other pieces to this work. Ian spoke about the communications. There is support around the engagement and the communications and marketing of this from a local provider. There is also all the procedures and processes that need to be considered internally to support this and resourcing around that. As I mentioned before, supply, looking at the supply strategy, providing nurseries confidence with their contracts and ensuring that there is the means for the labour out there for the full contract management. Those things are at the forefront of people's minds, and we're working through, along with obviously the monitoring and evaluation, which will also have an impact on the council staff around resourcing and how that will be done. So yeah, those key areas of focus, we know those are challenges, those are things that we need to think about. They're also areas that the government is thinking about, and we're looking to align and leverage what work they are doing. There may be opportunities to also leverage some of our plans with that from joint funding around it. So we see that the scheme can stand on its own 2 feet. Without Crown support, but obviously with Crown support, we'll be able to exponentially increase that pace and scale of what we're looking to do. So that will be one of the next steps as well. Year 1 and 2, it's an establishment phase, and we're realistic about the level of uptake and ramping this scheme up in, over the next couple of years as we do establish.
So the ambition for government support, you would hope that was in the form of a grant as well? That's not my understanding of it. But.
So yeah, absolutely. So that's the bit of work that the Chief Executive described, where we're looking to work with the Crown and understanding the sector's ambition around this, and where what they're calling their enhanced AGS, enhanced afforestation grant scheme, could come to play to help with activities that are not commercial in nature but are based around erosion control.
There's no grant nature to that.
Yes, there is.
There is.
Fully.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in crude terms, we're looking for $1 for dollar, if not better.
In the form of grant.
In the form of grant from the Crown.
As a minimum.
Mr. Chair.
Councillor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Possibly Ian might be able to address my questions. Perhaps you can go back to the slide, previous slide, please. I'm particularly interested in the governance and oversight, and I'll start off with the integrated catchment management approach we've also flagged in the long-term plan. Ian, I wonder whether you can overlay for me your approach to integrated catchment management, governance and identification, and then relate it to the erosion control scheme.
So as I had put in presentations in the build-up to long-term plan, the overall, if you like, prioritisation of where we might go in catchments will be something that we'll develop in partnership with communities in those catchments. It'll be informed by our biophysical science knowledge, so it'll help us understand where the critical areas are. It'll help target and narrow down parts of the catchments with the most or the issues, and then what we'll do is we'll overlay into that a range of other activities that council operates across, not only this one, but biosecurity, biodiversity related activities, science related activities, to look at areas where we have multiple objectives or outcomes achieved through a single investment in a particular area. And you'll recall I showed you a spatial planning tool that Waikato Regional Council developed that we would use as part of that exercise to figure out where the areas are with the greatest value.
Sure.
That's the longer term view, and so that's where we will get to it in
Perhaps
time.
just focusing on the governance aspect of integrated catchment management. You would anticipate localised or catchment-based governance?
Well, I guess we're using the term governance fairly loosely. Ultimately, the governance of the direction in its entirety sits with this council. What I'm signalling is that the success of the delivery of this will come through engagement with landowners and communities.
I appreciate. Let's go back a step then, Ian. What do you anticipate to be the governance structure for integrated catchment management?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Well, you've got a catchment location. You're anticipating aggregates of landowners being involved and other key stakeholders within that catchment area. We may assume, for example, that there may be councillor engagement at that governance level. We've got future farming scenarios overlaid that again. So what I'm trying to understand is a governance stroke administration concept for catchment-based integrated catchments, and now I'm trying to get to where this sits within that. To me, it seems like there are potentially one governance approach on a catchment basis, which is intimately connected to this, and yet overlaying it, we've got another or disconnected governance approach. Can you help me out with where we will land with integrated catchment management?
So I'm not sure that there's a disconnect, and I'm not sure I fully follow you, but I'll try and explain it. So there's an internal governance of this administration of the fund, just to ensure that it's effective, transparent, and delivers the results we all anticipate. There is a separate conversation that will start with communities and catchments to say how do we want to manage these catchments, what do we want to do where, what are the outcomes we want to achieve. That will be a partnership with the community in a broad sense, and it'll be fit for purpose for the catchment at the time. I'm open to that, including local councillor involvement in that, let's call it governance. I was thinking more a partnership environment with the community to help understand and then shape the direction of travel, so that we can then make sure that our activities and our investments are aligning with that and achieving the outcomes that we're looking for.
I appreciate that. Sorry to belabor the point. Why would you not insert erosion control scheme within that community engagement model. So you've got two models. One is a centralised, one might say autocratic management run bureaucracy versus a community-based approach which says we're going to engage with the community at their catchment level and progress catchment management at that level, yet outside of it, a key component is doesn't appear to me to be included.
Right, so I guess the difference is that those conversations are happening in catchments and that this scheme applies regionally. So this scheme is a resource that will be used across the region, and what we need to be able to do is make sure we've got an objective arm's length assessment of the totality of that picture across all of the catchments to make sure that things are going in the right places for the best value outcomes. It's difficult for us to commit, if I understand what I think you're saying, the ability for the catchment communities to grab a hold of this and run with and shape the way the funding's, in terms of how much they're going to get and where it's going to go, in isolation of the other activities we've got across the rest of the region. So it's difficult to do that. So for this reason, we have a resource, and that'll be available broadly, and it'll be well socialised and made known to people so that they understand how they can connect into it. And that'll be fair and equitable and transparent, and then people can choose how they get into it. I guess if it becomes evident in our discussions with catchment communities that there's a disconnect between what we're able to deliver, and the only disconnect I'm seeing potentially is going to be the scale and pace of that, then we would come back to you with a discussion to say, look, this isn't working, we need more and we need to do it differently.
I'm not suggesting we don't have set rules region-wide, because that's the nature of the scheme. But in terms of considering applications thereof, for example, in the Wairau community, would it not be, there's an alternative model that says, would we not consider deliberation on erosion control applications at a local level as opposed to centralised?
Well, I guess in essence, that's what the idea of the integrated catchment management plan for each catchment would be, is that it sets out what we want to do first, what the outcomes are. That's setting the ends, if you like, in a governance sense. That's setting this is where we want to go, what we want to achieve. And then the means will sit with the council staff to deliver. So the resources to bring to bear would sit with the council staff to deliver. Again, it's because it's difficult to go into a catchment and build expectation that if you paint a picture of, all of these things happening, and that's consuming all the resource or competing with what's going to happen across the balance of the region, it creates expectations that may not be able to be delivered on.
So is this a case of the early bird gets the worm? I mean, if Peter Kay has been working with a catchment group, and the catchment group is ready to look at a comprehensive tree planting initiative for that catchment, they could walk in the door, but Fenton could walk in the door if he's ready to plant trees on his property, and he's worked out a plan with his ICM manager. He's good to go as well. Is that basically
correct?
Can I make the observation, Chair, that I think what we're trying to achieve here is actually the avoidance of bureaucracy, because the most bureaucratic way of doing this would be to require every catchment to have a total plan for the catchment first of all, and then a convoluted process of prioritisation that essentially applied resources in a grand planned manner, if you like. And instead what we're trying to do is quite a flexible policy that enables landowners that come forward to get on with the job and us to get on with the job. So to some extent it is a first in, first served approach, but in our view that will get more runs on the board more quickly, and it will incentivise early action. And if it is a case of oversubscription, then we will come back to this table and we'll say that we think, for example, you should bring forward some of the borrowing that is proposed over the next 10 years and spend it more quickly because demand exceeds supply.
Councillor Bevan?
Thanks, Chair. I have to say, in the 5 years I've been sitting around this table, this is probably the most exciting thing that we've done. It's got the potential to transform, but it's in its infancy, and it's got lots of moving parts, and things will go wrong for sure, as we do this. So I encourage you to take the most flexible possible approach so that we can learn as we go, because that's what we're going to have to do. I'm looking at the table in our attachments on page 14 that breaks down the 252,000 hectares into 1,000 to 2,000 up to 5,000 plus tonnes of erosion per hectare. The very obvious thing to do is to target numbers 4 and 5, for instance, which goes against your first come, first served notion, James, that you just said, because the biggest bang for buck clearly is to be gained from the most erosion prone parts of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council area. How can we target those areas? And if we find the inertia that we talked about before, what regulatory tools do we have available that might help to get things done?
So before Ian answers, can I just note that it's not mutually exclusive. So we're not saying that we won't target the effort. Yeah. So the catchment staff will target the highest and most acute areas of need, but we won't wait to have that sorted before we're prepared to fund other works, which is to say, if there's willingness by landowners within the wider group, we'll get on and fund and do that activity, but we'll also try to get the most acute areas dealt with first.
So yeah, look, it's a really good question, Councillor, and we obviously agonised quite a lot over how to deal with the prioritisation. And back to my point that we're trying to keep it as wide open, the pipe's wide open at the moment, and effectively anything that will deal with erosion issues is in the door. Success for me looks like coming back to you pretty early on to say, look, I need more money, because people are so engaged in this and wanting to do something that I've run out of resource. At that point, we will absolutely, or prior to that, we will start narrowing it up and saying, because there's a range of mechanisms we could bring to bear in terms of the size of the grant. We could up the percentage grant for the highest yielding areas and reduce it for the lower yielding areas. So that's signalling to people that we'll invest in those over those. So that's one option, and there are a range of them that we would bring back to you in a review process to say, look, we need to narrow this up. A, we may need more resource, and B, we need to narrow the focus up to achieve the best value outcome with the dollar we've got. And I'm committing to you that's what we will do as we learn and as we adapt. Ultimately, yes, there is a range of regulatory options that will lay before you in time, and in the engagement and communication piece that we're developing, that will be an underlying flavour that sits throughout it, is that act now or it will be decided for you in time, potentially. That regulation is coming. We've all heard the narrative coming out of government around their ambitions around water quality. Sediment's high on the agenda. There are a range of national policy or regional policy instruments you could bring to bear that will regulate this and tell people what to do. So we're presenting an environment that's working with and helping and targeting the areas we want to go, but be very aware that in relatively short periods of time there could be somebody turning up telling you what to do and with no resource to help with that.
So in the context of tank, for example, if there were a decision in the tank scheme that either catchments, sub-catchments, or individual farmers must have a farm environmental management plan, given the nature of what we've identified as the problem there, which is sediment loss, one would have to assume that an erosion control scheme plan would have to be a component of a FEMP for that property, would it not? And so isn't that effectively a regulatory requirement? I mean,
yeah, so with tank absolutely, and the target that tank's heading towards is a 30% reduction in 10 years on sediment on a sub-catchment basis, and that will flow through into the required actions under those farm environment plans. Where we haven't got probably the policy thinking quite to yet is, what are the sanctions that sit in there? Do we put people onto resource consent? If people don't meet the 30% target, what then? And I think probably where Tank is at and where the community of interest is at right now is probably more, well, here are some significant resources on the table to help. Let's aim for 30% and let's monitor the plan, and at plan review, if there's more regulatory stringence that needs to be brought to bear because we're not heading towards that 30% target, then that becomes the option. But in the first instance, let's try and do it with farmer cooperation and with the very generous incentive program that's here.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions. You talked about in one of your slides landowner reservations, right? About being one of the key sticking points, maybe. What do you mean by reservations? Because look, every time we keep on hearing this thing about landowners don't want to do this and don't want to do that. Yet the reality is when we actually go out and start talking to people, they're really keen to get involved. Which, to my mind, I mean, this is the messaging we're hearing back from you guys. So, what do you actually mean by a barrier of landowner reservations? Because it strikes me that maybe we're being a little bit too pessimistic rather than optimistic.
Look, again, another really good question. I think it's there's two parts. So one is it's very clear that the primary sector leadership are all over this. So there's no doubt about that. All of the various groups who are, whether it's fed farmers, beef and lamb, they're all kind of operating in the space. The reality is, though, is that there are still landowners who will be relatively unaware of this, who will, when asked, say that there's no erosion problem on their farm, and genuinely hold that view. That we will need to work with to help them understand why we see the problem. There is a problem and where it is. That's just one of the things we know will exist. Experience tells us that underlies the kind of getting this thing going. And we're just being realistic. I don't think we're being pessimistic. I think we're just being realistic that that's something we're going to have to embrace and deal with and overcome to get this thing working properly. And I'm optimistic, though, that will happen relatively quickly. Yep. There will be pockets of resistance, and there's no doubt about that. And we won't be wasting a lot of time with those people because regulation will eventually catch up with them and sort that out. We'll work with those who have issues who want to work with us, and we're hoping in time the people who are the laggards will either drop out of the system or peer pressure will bring them on board and get them along, or ultimately regulation will deal with.
Cool. No, that's why. Again, that's just a messaging thing. I think we've got to be, we've got to try and get over this perception that every landowner is going to have reservations about this. I think we've got to be real careful about how we talk about that, because we've got to tell the positive stories rather than the negative stories. I think that's where I'm getting at with that. The other one, and I'm going to go back to this whole thing about, at the end of the day, we have yet to consult on whether we're going to go with this major reforestation program. We brought it up in the long-term plan, but we haven't actually gone out to the public with any sort of detail around what we're hoping to achieve. Would it be fair to say, James, that during the consultation, especially during the public meetings that we held, there was a lot of reservation amongst members of the public about us planting planting Pinus radiata trees. Yep. And it really concerns me that, like, even in the policy itself, and I think the policy's great. I think it's the way to go. It's flexible enough to give you guys the skill, the ability to do what we want to do. But again, I look to the introduction, and all the introduction talks about is the Kahatu Accord and planting commercial forestry. I'm a little confused as to why we are putting the cart before the horse on this one. We need to go there and have this conversation with the public as to what they're prepared for us to do, because we haven't done that yet. And that would be, the comment I would make on that is I think we need to be really careful about what we mean by commercial forestry. I think we need to be really careful about what are the drivers behind us wanting to do that big investment, the $100 million. Because at the moment, I think there's a disconnect between what's been said in the documentation and what the public actually thinks we're intending to do.
Councillor, I think you'll find that your concerns are well shared by staff, and I encourage you to talk to your colleagues about those issues.
So, in terms of a processing, Chair, how do we have that conversation? Where do we have that conversation?
Well, look, we're doing our best to build an evidential base to support a consultation document that will undergo heavy scrutiny in the way that similar major projects that the council has tried to progress in recent times underwent significant scrutiny.
Yep.
And we recognise that before there is investment of the nature that has been talked about, there will need to be a very solid business case indeed, which is why we're trying to pull together the very best expertise in the country to build that business case. And I'm struggling a little bit with expectations in terms of pace on this.
Yep.
So
That's what we're working through.
I mean, I'm comfortable that what's anticipated, what you're describing here, is going to provide adequate opportunity for people to talk about the strategy. It's the broader strategy, the 100 million strategy, what gets planted when, what's the best for what purpose, et cetera, what's the overall financial mix and so forth. Bringing the concern that Paul's raising down to this particular program, the $30 million program that's going to leave the box quickly here. The whole ethos of this is the way this is described is we're going to have a very proactive land management team. This project is really a stalking horse for a 16-person extension service that eventually is going to deal with biosecurity issues and lots of other things going on these properties. This happens to be the first. This happens to be the way to jumpstart it. Seems to me is what we're really doing here, and so the nature of the advice that these land managers, our teams, are going to give in the first instance will involve things like what trees to plant to deal with a particular property's circumstances. And so I guess the nearer term question in my mind that is somewhat reflective of what Paul's saying is, where are we getting that advice? Where are our 16-person ICM team members? Are they expert in this area? Or where is that expertise going to come from that sits behind them so they can help farmers make intelligent on-farm decisions about what to plant? And where is that coming from? And I think what Paul's reflecting, same thing I'm hearing, that's why we have an audience here today, is that there's a lot of concern about what kind of advice is going to be floating around out there, whether it's in the grand scheme of things or whether it's in who's going to talk to Peter Kay and his crew and give them sound advice on what to do in their catchment. Where is that advice actually going to come from, and how are we building that into the process?
And I totally appreciate that we're trying to go as fast as we possibly can, because that's best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is today. So the sooner we get into it, the better off we're going to be. And that's what I mean. In terms of the $30 million program that we're looking at, we've approved through the long-term plan. Absolutely, I think the policy is excellent, right? I think that does exactly what we need to be doing. So it was just, again, it's a messaging thing, and it's the language that we're using in that policy, especially that introduction, because everything else is as good as gold, kind of indicates. And again, it's the use, to me, at the moment, it's the wording of the use of the wording commercial forestry until the community has had an opportunity to come back to us and say, what do we actually mean by that?
So Councillor, I would just note that when we refer to commercial forestry, it's not necessarily commercial forestry undertaken by HBRC. What we're noting is that there's an awful lot of interest in commercial forestry right now, nationally.
Yep.
There are a lot of players in the mix on that, and it may well be that some of the most erosion-prone land in the region does get some form of forestry treatment without any intervention from the regional council.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the market will go, if that's suitable for pine in that particular area, they'll put it in and that'll be fine, because that means we don't have to do it. Yeah.
Councillor Bevan.
Thank you. One of the areas that this paper is silent on is the area of resource consents, and this might be a dumb question, but under the new national policy statement on plantation forestry, a resource consent is required to plant. I'm not sure how much of that requirement is going to transfer across to what we're doing here, but I imagine some of it will, and also going to be consents required for earthworks and what have you. That's not covered here. Is that going to be covered by us, or is it going to be shared, or how's it going to work?
So it's a good point in the fact that it's silent. I guess the view of the team internally has been that we're not paying for people's regulatory obligations. So if there's a regulatory requirement, be it resource consent or any other compliance measure that sits a result of this activity, that would be for the landowner to address rather than council.
Right, so you'd be really happy if our resource consent team got flooded with these, because it means that you'll be coming back to us for more money.
Yeah, perversely.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Chair, and following on from Peter's point around the regulation coming down the pipeline in terms of planting, I want to come back to governance. Sorry about this. And I'm looking at the governance element. This is on page 9 or page 10 at the bottom. Afforestation Program Governance. Governance of the Hawke's Bay Afforestation Program is provided by members of the HBRC executive team. Now let's be clear that we've got two beasts here. One is the Hawke's Bay Afforestation Program, HBAP, and the other is the Erosion Control Scheme policy. Most of this document essentially is about the erosion control scheme, and yet we have this overarching governance entity, which is around the Hawke's Bay Afforestation Program, which combines the commercial and non-commercial elements of the council's strategic direction. Are you with me? So my question is, we've got this connection relationship with the commercial outputs of council through HBRIC, which has a governance structure of its own, and now we're proposing that the entire HBAP is governed by executives of the HB executive.
Yeah.
So, Councillor, that's not what was intended, and I think that's a really good observation. So the governance that we're talking about here in this context is simply about our grant scheme. It's not proposing a separate or a new governance structure for the overall program. What we were trying to do is provide some context that within the overall program sits this body of work, and that there's some internal governance around it to make sure it's working effectively. And I understand, and it's not saying that governance applies to the overall activity, which includes all those commercial elements.
Sure,
that's not what's intended.
I was confused. Well, I've
We'll revise
obviously
that.
been confused by that assertion in the paper.
Yeah. We'll make sure that's absolutely crystal clear.
Can I now come back, though, to the erosion control policy and program itself and challenge the governance structure for it again, and ask the question, should there be, and I note in your commentary here, the governance group membership and structure may evolve over time. So what I'm getting from you is that we want some runs on the board, urgency around it, and get underway. That's great, love it. I think that's great, needed. But I am a little bit reticent about charging ahead in that direction without the buy-in of locals and when we're parallel trying to set up catchment-based entities which have a relationship to the community. Can you see my conundrum here?
And look, Councillor, look, it's sage advice, and I understand that completely. I guess what's ringing in my ears is I spent quite a bit of time working with my colleagues across the sector in the development of this, and I've spoken to those who've gone before us, and the advice that's ringing in my ears loudly from all of them consistently was don't over-govern the whole exercise. Certainly not initially. The more governance structures and entities you put in place, the more servicing is required by council staff, the more reporting, and the more time and the bureaucracy, if you like, of administering that. So it is that kind of tension between not over-governing it and your point is making people feel connected into some control of the resource and the direction of travel. What I would suggest is that in this early stage, keeping it broad and flexible is the way to get it started. And as we're signalling, as we learn and go into these areas and we find that these are things that are real and material, we'll come back to you and say, look, we want to do it differently to deal with those issues.
Sure. No, it's just that I've been around too long and appreciate. I've had the same commentary in 2001 around our land development issues then, and we'd had a centralised autocratically run scheme that manifestly did not achieve what we wanted to achieve. And I'm saying, should we do the same now, or should we change horses?
I think community partnerships is very much at the focus of how the ICM team is intended to work, and the tank plan changes proposing to create a framework for that in terms of those catchments. So there is a proposal that there be sub-catchment planning exercises done with the communities. We will help facilitate that, but that'll be very much community-led, and we've seen through the work Peter Kay's been doing in the sub-catchments that those communities are coming forward anyway, and they're saying, we want to work as a community, we know what our issues are, we want to put together a plan, HBRC, will you support us? So that is very much intended in terms of the way to execute here. I think what we've unhelpfully put in front of you is we've put in front of you essentially a project management structure, and we've used the word governance, which gets used in project management speak in terms of who sits at the top of the decision tree for the operational side of this. I'm very clear in my mind that governance of this program resides with this committee right here. This is the governance of this program. At staff level, day to day, there'll be operational project management that will have a governance layer to it, which is the executive, but very much the activity on the ground will be community led, and you can be quite assured of that.
Totally get that. I wonder if it's worth inserting for the next iteration some further commentary around what that looks like.
So
we'll revise
Can I
that.
make a suggestion, Neil, that we add another recommendation here, that we have as a standing item for this committee an update on what's going on, so that we're getting reported to regularly?
certainly happy to do that, and also look, that was the point of bringing the draft to you for the discussion. We will revise that. We've heard loud and clear those issues that are wisely put in front of us, and we'll incorporate your comments into that to reflect clearly what we're intending here.
So I would anticipate that initially what we're going to have in reports like Peter is asking about are a lot of process measures. We've talked to so many people, we've activated so many planting programs and so forth. When in this program would we actually begin to, and how would we measure outcomes? I mean, it'd be a long time before. This is being driven by a need to control soil erosion. And it's going to take quite a while before we see the fruits of this, is it not? So how do we deal with that? I mean, so we'll be able to count how many trees we got in the ground, and we'll presumably be able to monitor whether maintenance is occurring around the plantings we've done. We ourselves are managing the tree planting process, so we will presumably have confidence that that is being done properly. What else is being monitored and measured here?
So great question, Councillor, and again, something we've been spending quite a bit of time thinking about and talking about. So what we'll be able to describe to you very early on, and there'll be lots of reporting on that in the early stages of outputs. So what are we doing? Metrics around plantings and fences and those sorts of things. But actually this is about outcomes. There's a separate body of work that the Council will be undertaking internally in terms of its science activities and its biosecurity and biodiversity related activities to monitor outcomes. So are we seeing changes in biodiversity, whatever metric we're choosing to use for it? Are we seeing water quality improvements? And setting up a monitoring of those at appropriate scales and appropriate timeframes to be able to inform that. And I can't tell you exactly what that looks like now, because we're yet to get into these areas and start things working. We will make sure that the monitoring is tailored to where the activity is occurring. There's another body of work that we're engaging with the Our Land and Water National Science Challenge on, where they are very, very keen as part of one of their programs to bring their resources into regions like Hawke's Bay and help with that, because they understand clearly that nothing is more empowering for communities and landowners than seeing the products of their efforts, so the outcomes that are being anticipated actually being achieved. So that's a piece of work that will be a little bit longer in terms of being able to give you much, until we get this thing up and running, but it's certainly front of mind for us.
We are going to need to move on. Would somebody be willing to, or I'll move from the chair that we...
Can I just have one more question, Mr. Chair, before you do that? I just want to go to page 18, 5.2 other mechanisms. In addition to direct support.
Sorry, where are you? Page?
This is in the document itself, the attachment. Page 18 or page 19, which choose your poison. Bottom of the page, and it's got other mechanisms. In addition to direct support grants, a maximum of 350,000 per annum is available to support alternative activities. Is that 350,000 per grant or per the entire fund?
That's per annum. However, we anticipate that 350 won't necessarily be spent in its full every year, but it's particularly important in the establishment period when we are trying to accelerate the momentum and drive uptake.
Can you just, have you got an example of what might that
So below that, Councillor, is the Innovation Fund and the Strategic Relationship. So the Strategic Relationship is effectively us co-funding a beef and lamb extension advisor working in a catchment. Innovation could be an alternative plant species or planting mechanism or tree protection, those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's fine.
Can you conduct your conversation at Smoko, Chair? Can we get on with this?
So are you going to move that?
Yeah, I'm happy to move that. I'm ready to move, Chair. With a slight change to recommendation 2.2, that we just add the words, after adopts the erosion control scheme policy for administration of the $30 million grant scheme adopted in the 2018-28 long-term plan. And also Peter had some additional wording. And 2.3 requests that staff update the implementation of the HB AP, which is this thing. Yeah, HBAP to theirs
The ENS committee.
to future meetings as a standing item.
Can you just repeat that?
I'll repeat it since it's my writing. Request that staff update the ENS committee on implementation of the Hawke's Bay Afforestation Plan as a standing item at future meetings.
So one of you has moved that and one of you has seconded it.
I'm happy to second.
Okay. Any discussion, any question about what's been proposed there? So you want regular reporting, and you want it clear that this policy is in relation to the $30 million scheme, basically.
Yep.
That's the intent of the wording.
Yep.
Is everybody clear about that? I'll put the motion if there's no discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Is $75,000 for a land manager going to be enough, you think, Ian? We'll see how that one goes.
All right, let's move on to river berms. Is that you?
Yes, shortly Steve will give a very brief presentation, but this is an update of some work that was started in December 2016 on the public use of river berm lands. There's a lot of work happened since then, particularly by Shannon Bray from Wayfarer. I think Shannon's sitting down there in the back. There's a lot of conflict and a lot of use of our river berm lands. Some of it's all good, some of it's not so good. So Steve's going to take you just briefly through a few key points, and then he's available for questions.
Kia ora koutou. Good morning, Chairman, Councillors. Thank you, Gary. Management of Council river berm land. Presentation, just going to briefly cover the context of the item and then move straight into the coverage of the recommendations ahead of discussion. Just before I move on from the slide that's on the screen in front of you now, If you just look at the 5 images up there, they sort of cover some of the drivers and reasons for this review that was initiated some time ago. We've got rubbish dumping, we've got a cyclist on the pathways with horses coming the other way. One of those users belongs on that pathway, the other doesn't. We've got cattle in the Ngāroa River, in the water body itself. We have a vehicle hooning on the river Berm area, and we have a vandalised sign.
Hope that's not your vehicle, Steve.
No. I did have a video of it. It's quite entertaining, actually, but yeah. Okay, just in terms of the project extent, so the area covers the Hiratonga Plains Flood Control and Drainage Scheme, so land owned or administered by the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. Includes the Tūtaikuri to the upstream from the coast to the confluence of the Mangoni, the Ngāroa from the coast at Waitangi, upstream to just beyond Marae Kākaho, and then the Tukituki River from Hamoana up to Red Bridge. Also, partway through this project, some issues, public use issues developed on the Tukituki River Berm in Central Hawke's Bay, just adjacent to Waipukurau, and so we've done some thinking towards that, consistent with this review. Okay, so the context, the review was initiated in response to increasing pressures relating to cattle grazing of the river Berm, but primarily the incidence of cattle entering or being seen in our rivers within our project area, increasing public expectation over the levels of service and infrastructure provision, inappropriate use. So when we talk about inappropriate use, we're talking about those images on the first page: rubbish dumping, littering, vandalism, inappropriate vehicle use, and also a need for a consistent and coordinated approach to public use management of our river Berm. So over the years, our management has evolved in some ways in an ad hoc manner, but due to the increasing pressures, it's highlighted the need to get more coordinated with how we approach these issues. And so the review document, which you may have had an opportunity to read, goes into quite a bit of detail discussing the problems and the issues, and those have been grouped into 5 key focus areas, including reflecting and celebrating kaitiakitanga, reducing and or eliminating cattle grazing from the river berms, reducing undesirable behaviour, managing the adverse effects of recreational use and conflict, and improving amenity and landscape value. In terms of timing, the review started in December 2016. The intention was that it would be completed in time to inform the most recent long-term planning process. However, staff taking on additional or higher priorities in terms of responding to hotspots and implementing work programs meant this just got pushed back a little bit. It went on, the review goes on to identify options for improving or enhancing values and resolving some of our problem areas. It identified 27 areas or actions that would enhance our river berm management. Of those, staff have prioritised 9 for short-term attention, and that's resulted in 3 recommendations included in this paper. The first recommendation, have a technical, right. Okay, the first recommendation relates to the establishment of a dedicated ranger staff position to patrol our open spaces and berm areas. Of the 9 prioritised actions, to give the full effect to those, we really need to have a staff on the ground, a person that's employed with the specific skill sets to be able to educate, advocate and enforce council policy and values within our open space areas. And in terms of the type of person that we're thinking for that, they'd probably come from some sort of police or security background. Some of the inappropriate behaviour and the undesirable people that we are dealing with within some of our river areas, they are sort of getting worse in terms of their behaviour and attitudes towards staff, and we believe we need to respond accordingly with having the appropriately trained and staff with the appropriate skill sets in place.
So this is a Wayne.
What's
This
it?
is a Wayne.
A Wayne.
Yes.
A Wayne.
Wayne.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Just a question here, Steve. You've got one of the responsibilities could be to enforce.
Yes.
Would we have to go through and do give them some sort of special powers, or do we have to do a bylaw or something like that to be able to manage to be able to do that?
Yeah, look, good question, Paul, and one that we've considered. So our initial thinking was to go down the bylaw and get a special bylaw created, but we already have existing powers for trespass, and we believe that would be if we establish a working relationship with the police, and we have the resources on the ground, whereby if we catch someone that's engaged in inappropriate or undesirable behaviour, we can warn them, and if we catch them a second time, we have the power to trespass. To go down a bylaw route is a lot more involved in detail. Doesn't mean we cannot do that, but this would be our preferred option in the first instance, because we have the necessary power to trespass as it stands.
Okay.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? And I think you're recommending 2 people initially?
We were, in the review document, it recommends 2. I guess a little bit of a cautious approach from our end. We want to make sure we're getting the desired outcomes, and so we thought we'd get 1 staff up and running, which would mean a 5-day-a-week presence, and we'd target them to operate over the weekends and 3 days during the working week, and depending how that works out.
So is that the cost of that included in existing budgets?
No. So that's what we are seeking agreement. One of the recommendations that we're seeking agreement for is to establish financial provision. So we need to run that through either our next available annual plan or long-term planning round. Yep. And we, staff and consultants, have visited other regions who we consider leaders in the open space field, so in regional parks, Auckland, Wellington and Canterbury, and they all unanimously agree that one of the biggest changes they made, successful changes, was getting a ranger presence in place. So that's the first recommendation. Second recommendation relates to cattle grazing of the river berm. So, as mentioned briefly, the problem is cattle in waterways, not so much cattle on the river berm. Ideally, we'd like to get to an air point where we don't have to, we have other viable alternatives to cattle grazing on our river berm land, but identified through the review, it is the most affordable and viable at this point in time. It's cost neutral, and we believe we are seeking agreement from council that with increased vigilance and fencing and quicker response times, i.e. through a ranger patrol, that we continue with grazing as the primary maintenance tool on our river berms to manage against fire risks, plant pests, and conveyance as well. So the ability of our flood control and drainage schemes to convey water without being impacted on by unnecessary amounts of vegetation. In parallel with that, or in alignment with that, our next recommendation, final recommendation, is to use an area of the Ngā Roa where from Fernhill to the coast at Waitangi on the right bank, approximately 200 hectares the grazing lease has been relinquished as of July 2017, and staff haven't released that land with the idea that that's used as a case study, pilot study area to test alternative maintenance methodologies, including a do-nothing approach in a sizeable area, approximately 50 hectares downstream of the Chesterhope Bridge on the right bank, where we just monitor, watch and evaluate what is happening to that area with a no grazing approach to that, noting the fire risk and the fact that we're fully mowing the stop bank as a fire break on that section of river. Also, the third recommendations relates to developing or drafting what we call a concept development plan, similar to what we use for our regional parks, to look how that area of land, I think 400 hectares in total was grazed, or close to 400 hectares, so that's considering the left bank as well. How we can apply some detailed planning to that to consider which areas can still be appropriately grazed, where the most visible areas are that we want to increase levels of amenity, to raise values around the landscape values, also the cultural values, develop primary arrival areas such as the Chesterhope Bridge, access off Farndon Road. So people's first impressions, they're getting a good one, which will reflect positively on our regional brand. And we're seeking endorsement from Council to continue with that approach, to one, test and develop alternative berm management and maintenance methodologies, as well as develop planning and getting some cost estimations together to see, one, what it would look like and how much it would cost if we were to turn that particular stretch of river into a more park-like environment. And I'll just leave you with that image there. That's a current shot. That's a Chesterhope Bridge. River berm heading downstream towards Waitangi. That's the Ngāroa River. That's the car park presently. You can actually see where we have contained vehicles to a confined space there. That's potentially what it could look like, an artistic impression with a little bit of high level amenity put in place. And that's the presentation. Thank you.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Steve. Really excited about the plans as usual. What engagement have you had with tangata whenua over this through this process?
Okay, to this stage, no engagement, and that's clearly identified up front in the review document. The purpose to get this far is to understand the nature and extent of the challenges ahead of us with the river berm and identify a suite of options to go forward to consult on. With the Ngāroa concept development plan itself, once we believe we've got some working methodologies in place and a viable plan and an affordable plan, that's when we believe we'll start consulting, and with agreement from Council, of course, with the wider public, including mana whenua. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Mr. Cave, we've got people all over the river corridor now, daily. Why don't we just warrant everyone to carry a baton and a shotgun or whatever they need to do?
Would you like me to answer that, Fender?
No, but seriously, why don't we just give everyone a warrant to have the powers that you talked about, rather than having, I mean, you know, being blunt, this council just seems to want to throw staff at everything at the moment, and frankly, I don't see the value in it.
Yeah, I think seriously the risks are there in terms of generating fights and just conflict amongst those members of the public that would want to take it on themselves to try and sort out these problems, would create an even greater problem.
I think you missed my point. We've got a lot of HBRC staff already in the corridor on a daily basis. Why don't we just warrant them to have extra powers?
Councillor, we could do that. One of the issues we've got is staff are threatened, and they don't feel that they have the strength or whatever it takes to resist some of these characters. So it's a health and safety issue as well that we're looking at here.
I'll also add to that is that we've considered the existing resource, and to address the problems within our open space areas, particularly the river corridors, we believe we need a full-time presence on them. So literally a labelled vehicle that drives down the cycleways, for example, or the maintenance tracks, just, well, first and foremost and initially educating people, but where they come across undesirable behaviour, dealing with it through trespassing, dealing with it through working with the police to address those issues.
Thank you. I get all that. I'm just, I have a little bit of experience with the TAs, and frankly, they're warranted to do all sorts of things and trained and resourced appropriately. So I don't accept your answer. Second point, alternative means of keeping the berm under control. If we remove livestock, the simple issue here is cost, isn't it? So when you say viable alternatives, can you give me a view of what you think that's going to be? Are we talking about just a graduated cost scale? Is that the acceptable methodology here? Or, I mean, if you had unlimited money, we'd stop tomorrow and put tractors in there, obviously. But what are the viable alternatives?
Okay, so the alternatives that we're considering at the moment, first and foremost, is to implement some cropping trials. When I say cropping, cut and carry crops such as meadow hay, and we've got a 20 hectare area on the Ngāroa that's ready to go now. We're lining that up for the spring, summer coming up. We're also wanting to test rotational crops, if you like lucerne, where you're taking 3 or 4 or 5 cuts off it a season over the summer season, for example, when the fire risk's at its greatest. What we're needing to understand is how does it withstand flooding, sedimentation and debris and that sort of thing. So those are 2 examples that are being considered and ready for implementation now. As mentioned, there's also the do nothing. So we've identified risks, but we just want to see how real they actually are. So an area of river berm where we're just going to let the grass grow, we will control plant pests, but just to understand what is the impact of a grass sward, really. Yep.
Mr. Curtin.
Just going back to that staffing issue around rangers, etc. We've got staff currently engaged in compliance monitoring and other similar fast response, emergency response capability. What's the thought about engaging that team in this sort of additional workload?
Have not considered engaging, I guess, the compliance team to do this work. We've seen the fit being with the open spaces or the regional assets team, primarily because of there are other benefits that would come from the role as well, in terms of monitoring grazing, educating on just a visible, tangible presence, advocating for the open spaces and those values. And it's a skill set and expertise that, we believe it's in open spaces. But I hear what you're saying there, Neil, in terms of can that resource requirement be incorporated into existing sections of council.
Got staff in vehicles on the road. How much? What's the possibility around that?
Yeah, well, it's sort of, that's where we are now, and that comes back to Fenton's comment as well. We're there now. We have staff, sort of part-time patrollers, if you like, that occasionally will do a beat down a cycleway or will have a look down a river berm. But our findings from this review is that we need to lift that level of service to a full-time provision, and that is what will get the outcomes that we're seeking in terms of reducing undesirable activity, reducing vandalism, reducing littering and rubbish deposition.
And look, I'd just make the additional observation that the work program for the compliance team is significantly increasing at this point in time as we lift the level of compliance activity we're doing across resource consents, including those of territorial authorities, in terms of risks to municipal drinking supply, and also in terms of the bow wave of additional consenting requirements coming through freshwater plan changes and the forestry national environmental standards. So there's a bit of a trade-off, I guess, in terms of where we deploy that resource, but we are doing it in the context of a significant increase in activity. And yes, that has been funded with additional staff, but I think we just need to be cognisant that that there is a lot on right now, and so the occasional response to help out our works group or open spaces staff with a particular incident, I think is a possibility. But in terms of building in a substantive surveillance program within the compliance team, that would have to be weighed against all the other priorities right now in compliance.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but there's a potential to get efficiencies out of this. Yes, you need to add more people into the mix, but in terms of holiday times or cover, etc., your efficiencies, economies of scale start to kick in.
Councillor Bailey.
So, Mr. Chair, what about having drones? Just you can sit in an office here and do the whole river.
Pretty hard to talk.
Well, the council does have drones, and we do use them for examining parts of the river network. I guess the issue here is where you've got you identify a problem, you need somebody to be having a conversation with somebody pretty smartly on the ground. So I think, I don't know whether it's covered in here in any great detail, but surveillance cameras are something that we're also trialling.
That's correct. And just to make the point, to get the most out of the other actions, which includes looking at our padlocking system and new technologies that are available there, CCTV, refreshing our signage, that will only be so effective to a point, but without the on-the-ground surveillance and presence of a patrol, they just will not reach their full potential. For example, if we replace padlocks, that will have some positive benefit, but it won't stop those people that are cutting through the padlocks and gates.
Yep.
Councillor Bailey.
Just a question of clarification. Recommendation 2.2 commits to establishing provision in the next annual planning or long-term plan round. I get that. You're basically saying this is our plan. I haven't got the money for it. Can you chuck it in there? That particular wording though, does that commits to establishing? Doesn't that kind of implies to me that we were already agreeing to it beforehand, or is that?
You're quite right, Councillor. I think it should be commits to consulting,
Yep.
or commits to considering. I think would be more appropriate wording.
Considering. Yep.
Considering. Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the budget on page 29, and the two largest cost items there. One is fencing, which is more than $500,000. It says in the report somewhere that you trialled an electric fence of some sort, which proved to be both effective and resistant to flooding, and the electric fence is about 1/10 the cost of 7-wire batten type fences. Why would you not be considering using that more extensively?
Yes, so understand your question there, Peter. So the fencing for cattle containment is different to the fencing that's in the concept development plan. So the concept development plan we're putting together not only to test alternative berm management and maintenance methodologies, but also how we can enhance the open space values of that area, provide access. So it's a different type of fencing, a much more expensive fencing, sort of more akin to what you can see in that image there, bollard and wire rope, which is a lot more expensive. And that's, and you've correctly identified, in the rough order cost estimation, if we were to go out and implement the plan for the Ngā Roa to, say, create a new park as well as alternative berm management methodologies would be around 2 million, and that's just to start getting some figures in our minds of what the consequences, costs, implications could be. But that fencing, roading and plantings are the three biggest costs and account for 75% of the costs in that concept development plan.
Okay, so the actual biggest one, if I can find it again, is public vehicle with bollard, 637,000.
Yeah.
What is a public vehicle with bollard?
Okay, so that's, if I can,
Be a really flash-looking vehicle.
that's creating road and fencing infrastructure that would drive the length of the project area, allowing vehicles to drive up the river and park in places and then walk to the river at certain points.
So it's public vehicle access?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Or restricting where it can go. Right.
Yeah.
Making it obvious. Yep.
Sorry, I thought that you wanted to buy some amazing vehicle.
No, sorry. No.
I'm ready to move here, or
So you would move with the one word change to 2.2, commits to considering provision?
yep.
Somebody second that? Councillor Curtin seconds that. All those in, any discussion?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment, Chair, that this has been a contentious issue with the public. It's one of the things I've received numerous, not so much complaints, but had people ring me up and had a flare in my ear about what's happening on the river, on the rivers, and I'm really pleased to see that we've putting this concept development plan into place. I'm sure it'll go really well because it covers off a lot of the points that keep on getting raised by people. The unfortunate thing, of course, is that because it is open to the public, there's always going to be rat bags that are doing silly stuff. I was probably one of those 30 years ago, but such is life. So I'm really pleased that this plan that you brought to us, Steve. I'm really excited to see what's going to be happening on that stretch of the Nara Road.
Councillor Wilson.
Just briefly, I might sound a bit grumpy, everyone, but I just congratulate the guys for going away and doing what we asked them to do, which was give this a good once-over, and I actually think that there is a bit more work to be done. You know, as I say, I still have some questions around a few things, but, you know, at the outset, you guys were told to go away and have a good look at this, and I think you've done that very well. So happy to support it at the stages, in its age and stage at the moment, and let's hope we can find a way to stop those phone calls. I think we've all had numerous phone calls on this issue.
Any other comments? Put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve?
So we're going to.
Have a cup of tea.
We have one more decision item that we're going to try to squeeze in here. I thought I saw Tom Skirman.
I'll move.
So this is the zero carbon bill consultation,
Okay.
page 35.
Yeah,
Proceed.
yeah, all right. Morning, members. I understand you want to make this one a fairly swift one. So just once over lightly, this report has three sort of key elements to it. Outlines the government's proposals that they've put forward in the Zero Carbon Bill consultation document. In that document, there are 16 questions that have been posed around the proposals, the options, the government's preferences, and equally on some of those matters the government doesn't have a clear preference yet, so it's seeking public feedback on a number of things, particularly around the target of what a net zero future for New Zealand might be and how we get there, the issue around setting of emissions budgets, the role of a climate change commission, whether it be an advisory one or something with a bit more stronger powers in the form of regulations, and setting out some options around how does New Zealand Inc. adapt to climate change. Submissions on this consultation document close on 19th of July, which is not too far away. Between now and then, there are no further council meetings or committee meetings. So the proposal in this paper is that staff work with a few of the councillors or committee members, whoever you choose to nominate, in drafting up some of the submission. We circulate that around the wider council membership, and hopefully we are able to land on something that the chairman is able to sign off on behalf of the council before the 19th of July deadline. In addition to the Hawke's Bay Regional Council submission, whatever that looks like, myself and several other staff are also liaising with the likes of Local Government New Zealand and some of our regional council unitary authority sector networks to understand what a sector position submission might look like as well. So the recommendation there is pretty much around the process of developing HBRC submission. In paragraph 28, I've outlined some preliminary ideas around what our submission could cover. Certainly welcome other ideas or different viewpoints on those preliminary ideas from members.
So, really, item 28 is what our focus probably should be here in this conversation. If these are the ideas that are going to be the basis of anything we uniquely are going to say as a council on this.
And could I add that some of those preliminary ideas have flowed from previous LGNZ positions on things such as the Productivity Commission's recent report on climate change. So some of them, many of them, are not new, put it that way.
Councillor?
Yeah, I think all the points you raised in paragraph 28 are sufficient, or not so much sufficient, but I think they'll be fine for a submission to come from council. I think it covers all the main points as you said, Gavin. I'd love to have some further involvement, but I'm flat yakka for the next couple of weeks, so I wouldn't be able to have the time to do it, unfortunately.
Anybody have any concerns about the positions implied in 28?
Have fine.
So given that this doesn't seem to be causing any great heartburn of any sort, can we proceed to nominate the three councillors who will keep an eye on this? I will nominate myself as one of those. Anybody with a passionate urge to be involved in this? If not, I'd love to appoint some vacant people.
Yeah, like so, I'd love to, Chair, but I've got the pest management strategy thing, and then I've got a conference the week after. So,
I think our chairman would be delighted to serve on this group.
In my mind as well.
Other vacant people.
Must we have more than two? Were you raising your hand?
I'm happy to move the chairman, yourself, and the deputy chairman.
All right.
yes,
Okay.
Even though he may be here via the electronic connection, but even so, he will keep up with it.
Everyone comfortable with that?
Yep.
Will then someone move the recommendations?
So I'm happy to move that.
Thank you,
second
Ben. Yep. Paul Bailey, seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
There you go.
Easiest one today, Gavin.
Well, now we will take a coffee break for...
Nearly had to force the issue.
Anna, when do you have to do your business? Do you need to be gone by 11 or at 11? You can do 11?
I can do it, yeah, it's
I nearly had to force the issue, Mr. Chair.